At the end of this meeting, we'll have a couple of announcements um, about our upcoming talks that we have. Particularly, I want to really quick share my screen and talk about a few of the upcoming talks that we've got here with Sarah Manriquez coming in and talking this next month during APC's April third Tuesday event, where she'll be talking about her project Through Our Eyes, where she handed out disposable cameras to Fairbanks homeless population and kind of captured their perspective of the world around them. And there's some truly beautiful work here. We're looking forward to her talking about her work in this series and the variety of other nonprofits that she's been working with this project. On top of that, you've got Deborah Schlitt coming in May to talk about her stories behind storyboards. We'll have more information about that at the end of today's talk, as well as on our website and through social media. So make sure that you're following APC through our various accounts, both on Instagram, Facebook, as well as Twitter. So I want to introduce both Tom and Carol. I met Tom several years ago through my connections with the Society for Photographic Education. At that time, he was teaching in Texas, and I had no clue he had connections in Alaska, nor that there was any plan in the works for him to move up here. When both Carol and Tom did, I was overjoyed at what Alaska gained in this unique artistic duo. I'm most familiar with Tom's beautiful color-separated Alaska landscapes that you see here from his Color of White series. I've had the pleasure to show my work jointly with him in Anchorage at APU, where I was able to marvel at these impressive pieces in their full grandeur. In the last few years, I've made the time to have several lengthy conversations with him about art, my own creative practice, and have received nothing but kind and gentle encouragement in the right direction. A year after meeting Tom at SPE, I had the pleasure of getting to know Carol and her work as well. Carol's work focuses on ecology, climate change, and its human impact while exploring and documenting scientific archives, as well as creating unique art installations. I was introduced to Carol's artistic work and learning about her collaborative work with Tom with their Moonglow project, Operation Moonglow project, which I'm sure that they'll talk about tonight. In fact, it's this collaborative work that inspired me to, that is both separate and part of their private creative efforts that inspired me to ask them to talk tonight. As someone who has a creative partner as well, my wife is an artist as well, this concept of collaboration can be both alluring and absolutely terrifying. I've been nothing but encouraged by Tom and Carol's efforts to find ways to collaborate with my own partner, and look forward to hearing about their unique take on this experience. So thank you, Carol and Tom, for sharing your work with us tonight, both your individual pursuits and your collaborative projects. I'll hand it over to you now.
Thanks. Let me share my presentation screen real quick.
And thanks for having us.
Okay, so I think the presentation is up. Thank you for having us at the Alaska Photographic Center. We're always overjoyed to talk about our work. So I'll let Carol sort of talk about how we met a little bit.
Yeah, so when we were thinking about how we wanted to do this presentation, we thought we would kind of break it into chunks, like 15-minute increments, and then leave time for you guys to write questions in the chat box that we could read at the end of the section, or unmute and ask. And so we thought the first 15-minute chunk would be about Tom's work. And then the next 15-minute chunk would be about mine. And then we talk about field theory together. But before we dive into Tom's chunk, we wanted to say that we met in grad school at Texas Tech, and I was getting a degree in painting and jewelry metalsmithing, which is funny because I can't do any metalsmithing. And Tom was getting his degree in photography. And then we, after we both graduated, we moved to San Antonio, and we worked and lived in San Antonio for 4 or 5 years. Five. And then we moved up to Alaska about 3 years ago. So we're still excited about like things with, 18 inches of snow in one night. It's still exhilarating to us. But yeah.
So one of the things that we thought we would do is exactly what Jason said that we weren't going to do, but we thought we would open it up for questions at the end of each section, just to do a quick, while it's on your mind, while it's fresh. Yeah. So at the end of my work, we're going to open it up for questions. And if we can keep that relatively brief, but then at the end of Carol's work, we'll also open it up for questions. And then at the very end of the presentation, we'll open it up again. Okay, so we'll start with talking about my work, The Color of Memory. The Color of Memory is a multi-chapter body of work that sort of spans a whole bunch of different things. And I'd like to start out talking about my work with a quote. Ralph Waldo Emerson said that time and space are psychological colors which the eye makes up, but the soul is light. Emerson, as you know, was a transcendentalist, and they thought that nothing could answer all of the questions of the world. And so they thought they needed to combine science and Christian beliefs and Eastern religious teachings and direct observations of nature to create a more poetic understanding of the world. Transcendentalism was very popular around the beginning of the photographic era, the beginning of the 19th century, or the beginning and middle of the 19th century. Before reading about transcendentalism, I tried to sort of shoehorn my work into a directly scientific reading. But my current thinking is more about its relationship to poetry and this sort of transcendental search for understanding. So through my work, I want to create a more deliberate experience of the landscape, one that slows the viewer down, makes them consider and understand the sort of the difference between time and perception. I use landscape photography as a background to work, for my work to resonate against. My feeling when viewing a photograph is that the past, the present, and the future oscillate and they overlap, and they always sort of refuse to line up. And it's that interplay of time within the medium that gets me particularly excited. This body of work, as I was saying, is called The Color of Memory, and it's a multi-chapter, multi-section body of work, and it explores concepts of time, perception, and memory within the landscape. The first section is the Santa Monica color experiments, and this was just that. These were my first sort of grasping experiments towards this project. This section was completed in 2014, and it quickly did inspire more from this series. The Santa Monica color experiments examines the sun setting over the Pacific Ocean, specifically the last hour of daylight before the turn of the new year. The exposures remained relatively constant throughout the work. The unexpected colors that you're seeing come from taking 3 adjacent images and then rearranging the color channels. Each image is made up of a red color channel from one image, a green from a second, and a blue from a third. And I recombine those in Photoshop. The reappropriation of source imagery causes ghosting and fracturing, where the expected colors of the ocean and sky. As time passes, these exposures get longer and the ocean gets smoother. Eventually, each of them becomes pastel patterns in a smooth field of color. The process goes back to the very first color photographs by John Clerk Maxwell and Thomas Sutton, where they used Isaac Newton's discovery of the primary colors of light, red, green, and blue, to create a trichromatic composite image. These two guys made 3 different black and white photographs of the same subject, but placed a red, green, or blue filter in front of the lens for each image. And then they would project those images back through a magic lantern projector through the same color and line them back up to create a color image. This technique was also used by a Russian photographer that has recently gotten a lot of play, Sergei Mikhailovich Prokudin-Gorsky, and he photographed and documented Russia in the turn of the 20th century, just after the turn of the 20th century, and up until the Bolshevik Revolution. And then later in the 70s and 80s, Robert Harris explored this technique with what he called the Harris shutter and color film. Much of my work reflects my fascination with science and how the camera works, but also how memories are captured and how time can be experimented with. Sublime gestures, like other sections in the color of memory, flips that perspective to create distorted relationships in color and movement. The work examines the importance of movement to the perception of the landscape while simultaneously stressing the beauty of that movement. The work investigates the national park aesthetic, specifically capturing the movement of nature and the cycling of light. Through the use of the national park motif, I explore a desensitized relationship to the sublime landscape. For sublime gestures, I'm specifically placing my camera at photographic lookout points that are designed by the national park, as well as some of the other artists who've come before. I was interested in how overlapping colors could nod at a collective memory of place. And I wanted to use this surprising color process to hopefully wake it up and give it a little bit of new energy. I'm going to skip forward a little bit and talk specifically about the fourth body of work, because we're going to circle back to the third body of work in this series later. So this is the color of white. Most of you guys are familiar with some of this work. For the color of white, I'm interested in movement of light and weather in what appear to be white landscapes. And as you guys might know, or as Jason said earlier, I used to live in San Antonio. We didn't have white landscapes. So I had to travel quite a bit for this body of work. And we would hunt down white landscapes, and they would largely take up our winter breaks from our teaching schedules. For instance, this image that you're seeing now, it was made at Glacier National Park on New Year's Eve of 2016. So when that opportunity jumped up, when the opportunity popped up for us to come work in Alaska, we both just jumped at it. We'd been up here to visit her family a few times, and we loved it. We came in the winter, so we sort of felt like we at least had some notion of what we were getting into. But this beautiful landscape that we live in has been very productive. The weather, as you know, is very difficult to predict, but if I can look out the window and see what the weather's looking like and say, okay, it's time to go shoot, it's a lot easier. The work itself is getting more centered on the mountain peak and the cloud. This is partially influenced by my new surroundings, but it's also a reaction against growing up in the flat deserts of West Texas. I often juxtapose something white that doesn't move, like a treescape, with something that does move, like clouds, water, or falling snow. I find that this strategy causes two effects. One, the weather works to highlight the form of the landscape. Or two, the weather works to obscure the landscape. And I find that this conversation between flatness and form is almost a stand-in for memory, or more precisely, what is known versus what is unknown within the frame. While shooting The Color of White, I began contemplating my own memory of the landscape. And to respond to this I devised a plan to make 3 identical photographs of a place. So I got to the location, set my tripod up, made one image, then I took it all down, put it back in the camera bag, took the tripod head off, and put it all back up. Then I pulled it all back again, put the tripod in the exact same holes, put the tripod head back on, put the camera back on, and tried to remember the frame that I had just created. I did this for a second time. I put it all back up a second time, and then I put it back up for a third and final frame. What you're seeing here is the composite image with the register being on the mountain peak. Everything else that's out of register is where it didn't line up, obviously. So I'm always drawn to a known landscape, and Portage Glacier has a memory sort of built into its very nature. The glacier itself holds the land as it was, as well as the land as it is. I think that there's a real history with glaciers, and I haven't quite tapped into what those emotions are. So right before I left San Antonio, this is the 5th section of The Color of Memory. Right before I left San Antonio, I photographed bats. And bats is an exploration of a specific place in Texas. And this is called Bracken Cave. It's between San Antonio and Austin. And this is a really extraordinary place because over the summer, this is the largest maternity colony of bats in the world. And all of those bats, they fly out in a vortex, a clockwise vortex, and then sort of disperse into the sky to eat all the insects. It's really a sublime event, and it takes about 2.5 to 3 hours for all of these bats to come out of the cave. Perhaps in the most direct manner of all of The Color of Memory, bats introduces the notion of chance into image making. I'm sure that all of you guys have experienced a happy accident in your own art making. And I was interested in taking that a bit further and truly allowing chance to play a role. The introduction of the element of uncertainty and contingency into the work gave me the agency to let go and follow the bats. Chance in art occurs when in the context of a certain predetermined condition. So my rule was that the work was to simply attempt to follow the bats. My rule in that work was just to follow the bats. And so I picked out one bat and I followed it for a few seconds. I let the camera's motor drive fire the shutter as fast as it possibly could. And then using shallow depth of field and a different variety of lenses, I could create different looking images than I was creating with The Color of White or Sublime Gestures. This is where you should stop. So we have a moment here where we can accept or sort of come up with a few questions. Does anybody have any sort of questions about my work? Okay, so
hold on.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Tom is running. I don't know if anybody else could tell.
Sorry. So do you ever so how do you print these out to display them? Do you just do a digital print? Do you do like a, what's it called? Gum
bichromate?
Yeah, have you ever done that process with these images or even screen printing?
So I have, mostly they're digital inkjet prints, but I've also done some transparency layering with them, and then I've backlit them, and that's sort of a beautiful presentation. One of those, I created this sort of giant frame that the transparencies they would float in the wind, and you could see through them, and they would move independently. And that lived for about 4 hours until a drunk college kid decided to run through 4 of them in a row. And so that one didn't live.
It's an outdoor food event.
It was an outdoor event, sure. but no, I've experimented in a lot of different ways. I've wanted to print them in gum bichromate in the past, but that at the time that was just outside of my ability, and it doesn't mean that it won't happen. I really do believe it would be beautiful, or even a carbon-based print could be a beautiful alt process version of these.
Yeah, no, that's cool. These are so made for that. That's I think it's great.
In fact, Percuden Gorski used carbon prints when he did the printing on his work.
Cool.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions before we move on to the next chunk of presentation?
Okay, so we'll see if we can't share the screen again.
Fingers crossed.
Wait, I have to do the...
Can you guys see it? Yeah. Okay, thanks. Okay, so this is my section, and I thought I would talk about my experience working at a zoo and how that really influenced two different bodies of work that I'll share with you. And then I'll talk a little bit about kind of curating, because I feel like it all leads into our field theory business that we're starting and getting excited about right now. So this first slide, I was just literally looking through my phone the other day trying to think up fun images from my time working at the zoo that would be enjoyable to share. And this was one that just resonated with me. It is, so my roles at the zoo, when I first started, I was part-time and I was adjuncting, teaching design, art appreciation, and drawing at a couple colleges. And then I at nighttime, I would go and I do my cool zoo job and I go sleep in the zoo and do overnights. And so, and then when I began working at the zoo full-time, I became the person who did all the community programming, which included overnights and camps year round. And so this is a photograph of one of those unique experiences of being in the zoo by myself. And I say by myself, but without a chaperone because I'm a full-time employee, and walking around and seeing the flamingos lit up by the security lights at night, and just kind of their quiet moments when guests aren't there during the day. This one is, there's a unique thing that happens every year. And on the left, it's called the Flamingo Roundup. And they ask full-time zoo employees to come and hold flamingos while they give them their vet checkup, because there's, 50, 60 flamingos in an enclosure, and they have to get them all processed through the temporary setup vet clinic outside the enclosure for, 2 to 3 hours. And so they'll basically wrangle them and they'll pick it up and they'll hand you a flamingo, and they are jerks and they bite and they're mean. Everybody walked away with bruises under their arm because they turn their head around 360 degrees and just nip at you. But that's a photograph of putting a new tag on the leg so you can identify if it's male or female, and taking a little blood sample. And then on the right, running zoo camps was one of the coolest jobs, because I would arrange for my zoo campers to do all of these really unique behind the scenes. And they would be in, basically I would just dream it up, and I would go ask different departments like reptiles and the aquarium, and be like, so could we maybe see all the venomous snakes that you never show the zoo? And it would either be, yes, we like you, or no, you've annoyed us this week. But on the right is all the venomous snake species. And these are the little baby ones that they're breeding behind the scenes. And some of them never go on display just because they're endangered and critically endangered, and they go on to have other lives in other locations. And so many things I learned at the zoo. And one was how animals were traded, sometimes purchased and shipped. And we had a insect collection in the education department that we would show to people. And so one of the cool things about working in education is that we have our own collection of animals that we can bring out, living animals that we can bring out and show people. And my mind was just blown on the day that the lady who runs our bug collection got a shipment of bugs in. And it was all of these species I'd never seen before. A leaf bug. I didn't even know that there were bugs that look like leaves. That little jerk on my hand over there, he's coming out of his kind of, they give him a little smoke and kind of make them calm down when they overnight ship them. But he's the meanest bug I've ever held, because right now he's licking the water. He's a little dehydrated. So they squirted my hand and put him on there. But he has these huge spikes on his legs. And so, and he was very rare because he was yellow, and usually they're green, but he would stab and hiss anytime you picked him up and presented him. And he would just move his little back legs in your arm until you were just about to cry. And you're trying to tell kids the bugs are great. They're just amazing. And he is stabbing you and making you hate him. And there's rhino beetles inside that styrofoam container. And then Tom also, earlier when he was showing you the photographs of bats, some of the cool things about working at the zoo is just you have access. So San Antonio is the 7th largest city in the United States. And I worked for one of the largest zoos in the United States, with one of the largest collections and conservation programs. And I learned the weight of the name of the San Antonio Zoo, the organization, open doors. I mean, I could send anybody an email. I could email REI and they would come and talk to me and come to me. And this was one of those things where the Bracken Bat Cave, like Tom had mentioned before, is a private property. It's locked off and they only do maybe 10 public viewings a year and you have to be lucky to get tickets. But since I was running overnight programs, I wanted my overnight staff to see the bats so they could talk about them. So I emailed Fran Hutchison, who runs the property and has the keys to the gate. And I asked him if we could come and watch them one night, fly out and talk to him about it. And he works in collaboration with Bat Conservation International. And here's a quick little video of them flying out, like Tom was saying, in a vortex that lasts for about 2 hours. And hawks are diving down and picking them out, and snakes are jumping up out of the air. And it's at dusk in the evening. It's pretty incredible. And just learning the implications of what that species means and how much they save farmers and insecticides every year, because they're just this mass of female bats are heading out of their maternity colony and eating up bugs. Yeah. So I bring up the zoo because that is where this, let me make sure it's showing. There we go. There it is. That's where this photo series started. And I call this series the Alike series. And it's because it's focusing on objects, collected objects that are alike yet dissimilar in nature. Some of the photographs are homophones, which are words that sound alike. Some of them are objects that have, like, you know, some are very real and natural and some are artificial in ways. And so this was the first one that I took. And when you do zoo camp and you take campers out into the zoo all day, you might say, oh, I'm going to go by the bear enclosure. And we have these huge cabinets of all of these artifacts. I mean, from rhino horns to elephant ivory, things that you have to have permits for, but you're allowed to have them at your facility because they are educational tools to teach from. And so we had all these bear claws. And so at the beginning of zoo camp day, you would put your bear claws in your pocket and then or in your bag, and then you go to the enclosure and you'd look at the black bear and you would let them see what their claws were like and talk to them about the purpose and why they were the way that they were. So anyway, so this one is a black bear, a grizzly bear, a sloth bear, a polar bear, and then of course a bear claw donut. So it's kind of a fun play. These are feathers from the San Antonio Zoo's collection, and some of them are very commonplace, like a peacock feather or a flamingo feather, and then some of them are from really rare, critically endangered cockatoos or atwater prairie chickens, eagles that, you know, you have to have the paperwork to go with. Birds of paradise, penguin feathers. And the deal with this one is that one feather is artificially dyed. So all the rest of them are natural. And then that bright yellow one is artificial. These are eggs, yet again from the San Antonio Zoo. And the eggs, sometimes with the birds in the enclosures, just like with the feathers, they fall out like hair. The eggs aren't fertilized when they're laid, they just lay them. And the animal specialists will pick them up out of the enclosure, poke a little hole in it, get the yolk out, and then they'll give it to us so that we can share it. And so I think some of the coolest ones are here. There's a hummingbird egg, and I mentioned atwater prairie chicken again, but that one's just so critically endangered for Texas. Emu, and then the play on this one was the cascarones egg, which some of you might know in San Antonio or in Latin culture is a big deal. It's basically a chicken egg with confetti inside, and you throw them at special events. These are leaves, and you can see that one is the leaf bug that I had mentioned earlier with the insects. And this one is where I was living in Alaska, and I was missing this just huge array of a collection that I could go and access without speaking to anyone, and I had taken for granted. And I started researching and meeting Jason. The Museum of the North has a very large collection of specimens, and I was able to work with their ornithology department, and these are bird specimens from that department. And so this one's called Birdies, and you can see the shuttlecock birdie, and then next to the birds. And I love the little tags when this is printed off, because you can read where they collected it, and like one says car strike on it, and really fascinating. And then this is just another version of it. This one's also in collaboration with UAF. And it's a jumping mouse with mice. And then I did a series of these in Texas, and they're honey sticks. But the left portion of it is natural colored honey, just based on where the bees are going and what they're eating, and you know, their environments and the time of the season and so forth. Where the ones on the right that become very Dan Flavin-esque and very like little neon light tube looking, those are all artificially dyed. And so I did several arrangements of these. This is just one, but I was thinking about Dan Flavin and his light works. And so I did some that were more designed and oriented in different ways. Flies, with fishing flies, the natural flies. And I'm going to redo this one pretty soon and have it be an overwhelming amount of flies, and you know, more different species of dragonflies and a lot more fishing flies. And then cones. And then here is Tom and I were happy to be in the Alaska Biennial recently. It was a first for us. And so here's birdies there. And then this is a series of work called 1796. And in 2017, San Antonio had its centennial, its 100th anniversary, 100th? Yep, anniversary. Bicentennial. And they gave a series of artists a year to make artwork about. And they gave me the year 1796. Nothing happened in the year 1796 at all in San Antonio. And so realizing that I liked collecting, realizing that I liked artifacts, I decided I was going to go around and collect rocks. And I was going to collect 1,796 rocks from the San Antonio area. And so then Tom and I got in the car and we went and to a lot of different places and got a lot of different rocks. And here are some of the fun specimens that we found. And it was interesting seeing ones that I always thought it was a metaphor for the city, as in rocks that were transplanted in from other places, kind of like people, rocks that you could tell had been there a very long time and were a part of the quarry that built the Alamo, and then rocks that seemed very artificial and had asphalt ingrained in them. And so there's no way I was going to display 1,796 rocks in the museum space. And so I built a stand and picked out a select few that I felt had a lot of character. And then I published the rest of them into a series of catalogs. And so you could flip through all of this history, this geological history from the city, and yeah, and it would just be archived. And then before we move on to field theory, because I think everything has a link, I wanted to just give a brief overview to curatorial, because one of my passions that I really love doing is curating in artwork and meeting artists. And Tom and I used to run an artist-run studio gallery space called Clamplight in San Antonio. And it was a blast. But through that, I was like, ooh, I'm hungry for this. I want to do more. And so one of the first projects I did was a exhibition called Fibers of Design. And it incorporated 3 different artists. And it was 3 different women. It was a local artist from San Antonio, Amada Miller, a regional artist from Houston, Delaney Smith, and then Megan Shimmick from San Francisco is my national artist. And it was really great. The exhibition was on display at Northwest Vista College, and then it traveled to Capsule Gallery in Houston and was there for a while. But the exhibition, I was teaching design when I was doing this, and it was meant to be a way of showing design students how design can become both functional and form and just all those vocabulary words. So anyway, so the artwork that's on the screen right now is Delaney Smith, and she does works in paper. And the piece on the right is called Signatures, and it's where when you're doing bookmaking, you know, you fold the piece of paper in half, and a single fold is known as a signature. And so she would do that thousands and thousands of times, and then dye these huge folded paper pieces to make signature sculptures. And then she'd also, on the left, she made these interactive pieces that were recipes, basically. So it was like, put 3 staples into the piece on the right, and you would interact with it, and you'd staple into the piece on the right, and then you would remove 3 from the piece on the left. And so it was the trace of human interaction within the pieces. This is Amada Miller's work from San Antonio. And she was very talented designer and working with fabric and dyeing. And then Megan Shimmick, who does a lot of weaving and roving pieces. And this was one of hers where it was large balls, and she had other large weaving pieces too, but this one's, she wanted people to interact and walk through it. And then quickly though, another exhibition, Photographs and Face Masks, working with Abigail Brown from London. These are paper mache painted face masks. And then I juxtaposed her work next to Diana Fox, who I believe just retired from the University of
Eastern Tennessee or something?
Eastern Tennessee, maybe. But yet again, animals, you know, linking to the zoo, she, her work is going to natural history museums and photographing stuffed taxidermy animals behind glass, but she's specifically trying to pick up the reflection of people walking into the museum or walking around, and how it kind of interacts with these stuffed animals. And then transitioning into working at the zoo, working in the zoo education department, but I also had I was offered a chance to work in the marketing and special events department. And through that, then just doors opened up when you're in the marketing team and the events team. And so San Antonio Zoo built a zoo school. It was one of the first accredited preschools within a zoo, and the largest in the United States. And they let me curate in some of the artwork, which I felt very privileged to do. And this was Bridge Projects, and this is their lobby. And it's clouds that are illuminated, and they're energy efficient and go down. And then this was when I was in the marketing department and with special events. One of the first events they gave me was Monarch Fest, and they were like, go wild. And I was like, well, obviously I'm going to find an art piece, because when you walk into the zoo, there's this big open circular area, and the idea is to put something impressive there that people want to take a photograph with when they enter the zoo. And so I said art, obviously. And this is La Monarca, the world's first land art generator solar mural installation. Such a mouthful, didn't come up with it. And a San Antonio-based artist, Cruz Ortiz's work is on it. And then this is Cruz's work for Zoo Camp. And then finally feeling like I'm getting my footing in Alaska. I'm excited next month. It got delayed with the pandemic, but next month I currently work at Chigiak Elementary, and I put together a little renegade art club, and they raise funds to bring in some artists from New York and ones from Portland. And they're going to paint a mural on the side of our building, which we're pretty jazzed about. And that's kind of a mock-up of what it's gonna look like. So yeah, before we go on to our collaborating piece, does anybody have any questions?
I guess I do, Carol.
Yeah.
With projects like the school project that you just mentioned, do you have any tips for someone that's a complete novice that wants to get involved in doing something of that scale, or maybe slightly smaller, but still, you know, how do you inspire people to want to invest in public art like that?
That was the hardest part of that job. I will tell you, there were times where I would do it, and because it was passionate to me, and I would get slapped on the wrist a little bit later. I think you have to have an advocate inside, or none of those things would have happened.
Well, that, and also you turned your art club into minions, little art minions, and so having a manipulative little little group.
But the zoo, I will say, at the zoo, there were several emails that I would get, and they would just random email someone at the zoo, and then they would forward it to my computer. And I remember for special events, like we had multi-million-dollar budgets for our summers. And one summer we brought in animatronic dinosaurs and the lights, like we would do zoo lights every year. And these are huge grossing events that bring in the money for the entire year and pay for hundreds of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, thousands of people to work. And so I think sending emails, honestly, I got one time that was about a Chinese light event, and we looked at it again and again and again. And it was just someone who, and it just wasn't the right time, but also circled back. I had proposed a couple summer art events, and since I've not been at the zoo, it's interesting to see they kept those ideas, and now I see them pop up on their Instagram, and it's like, oh, like the seed was planted, but they needed 3 years to get there because they planned so far out. So I think just keep making contacts, keep emailing. Some of the people, so for instance, the lobby at Zoo School, that worked out. They kept me, I knew them through the art world, and they had cut me a little bit of a discount because I didn't have a large budget at Zoo Camp to do things. And they had helped me out with a couple things that kind of just made my camps amazing. And then when I got that next job and the next promotion, it was kind of like paying it back. And sometimes it's okay to pay it forwards a little bit. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's, if there are no more questions, let's jump into collaborating.
Yeah.
And how we like to collaborate.
I'm getting there. Okay.
Cool. So our collaboration has taken sort of many forms, but it really started with a body of work called Lunar Calendars, which was the third section in my Color of Memory series. Lunar Calendars it's a section that looks at, it's a section that looks at the cycling of the lunar phases and how our perception of each phase combination sort of changes across the light spectrum. So lunar phases are the shape of the moon that is directly lit by the sunlit portion of the moon as viewed from the Earth. And just sort of as an FYI, there are 8 lunar phases. So I sometimes show this work with anaglyph glasses, the red and cyan glasses that you would put on at the 3D movies back in the 60s. This also plays really interesting tricks with your vision. And as a school teacher, I like to activate and I like to play with expectations to give fun additions to the experience. Through the use of appropriated lunar calendars, these depictions of lunar phases and lunar events, such as lunar eclipses, this work looks at the constructed relationship, our constructed relationship with the Earth's moon. The idea for this work came when Carol and I were visiting McDonald Observatory in Fort Davis, Texas. This is really close to that, to Marfa, which is where Carol was talking about Dan Flavin's light and space sculpture. So it was probably the same trip. We went to the McDonald Observatory, and while there, we were able to see the moon in detail and hear a talk about it. And I became really intrigued by this notion that we all have a similarity of experiences to this celestial object. And I'm sure it was like 2/3 of the drive that I annoyed Carol with talking about the moon. So each lunar calendar in this section is appropriated and then layered on top of itself through the red, green, or blue color channels, creating varying hues based on the different lunar phases and how they line up. My active appropriation from publicly funded institutions like NASA, I really hope to question the ownership of these objects, of the celestial object. Each of the following images is overlaid from multiple phases of the moon through various color channels. The first here is the first quarter in red, the full moon in green, and then the waxing gibbous in blue. This body of work was featured in Wired magazine and has been circulated at NASA and JPL for inspiration for their scientists and engineers. This is the new moon in red. And when we say new moon, it just basically means there's no moon being shown. The third quarter in green, and then the waxing crescent in blue. The word waning means to get smaller, and the word waxing means to get bigger. And I'm sorry, that was the waning crescent in blue, not the waxing crescent. So here we have the waning gibbous, the waxing crescent, and then the waxing gibbous. So as a sort of, as our bridge for collaboration, we used these ideas. Carol took some of them.
Yeah, so Tom is doing this exhibition, and I'm like, oh, you should have, you know, I'm working at the zoo with events at the same time. And I'm like, you should be having like moon pies from Baker Lorraine, and you should, light up shoes and anaglyph glasses, and like, let's make it interactive. And he's like, no, that's not what this is about. Okay. That's not what my work is about. Please stop. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so I let him have his space. And then a year or 2 years later down the road, I get handed a nighttime event at the zoo. It's just a single night event, and it's for kids. And so yet again, I have that huge, grand, empty opening at the beginning of the zoo that I need to fill with something thematic for the event that people want to take a photo next to. And since the event is called Dream Night, I'm like, this is my opportunity. I need the moon. I need to make one of Tom's moons into an inflatable, a glowing inflatable that will just swamp a little kid and they'll look up in awe. It didn't happen. Budgets and just, life. I probably could have got it done a couple years later. But what did happen was we had the opportunity to put in for a festival grant in San Antonio. It's actually once we moved to Alaska, Luminaria Art Festival. It's this wonderful, huge nighttime event. And I wrote a proposal. I was like, Tom, could I use your moon? Would it be okay? And he says, sure. And so we type up the proposal and we put it in and we get it. And so then we get to have his two-dimensional moon turned into an inflatable. And here's a quick video of the event. There we go. So what we learned from this event was make it big and make it glow. It was fascinating how many people came up and took photographs next to it just because it was a good backdrop for their Instagram. And then me being like an Instagram fiend went online and looked up the location and looked up the event tag and just was flooded with all these wonderful moon photographs. So Tom and I were like, okay, well, maybe it works. Maybe we can work together. And then we started proposing it out into the world. We were like, well, we had this successful event. Let's see what we could do. Maybe we write STEAM aligned curriculum, STEM, but with art for STEAM, and propose it to botanical gardens for their nighttime events, for zoo, kind of like Zoo Lights would have artists come in and we would do stuff with them. So we were starting to get all of the gears moving, and we were gearing up, and then the pandemic happened and everything slowed down. And it was wonderful. We had gone to SPE and Jason was there, and we had gotten several wonderful opportunities that were like, we want you to come out in May and we want you to come here. And it was, it's like, as soon as we landed, it was like, never mind, take back, not going to happen. but yeah. But anyway, so that's kind of our first thing into public art. But then you want to talk about the vinyl?
Yeah, one of the fun things that we did, that Carol did, I think, mostly, was we created this audio composition that could be played with the moon as sort of an audio piece. And it's really fun because we had it printed and pressed onto a vinyl record. There's music, there are speeches from politicians that talk about the moon that are on there, like short snippets of speeches. There's also radio transmissions from the moon to the Earth and vice versa. We went through a lot of the old mission archival
so like
radio transmissions.
The Apollo talking back to Earth, and like the sound of their footsteps on the moon the first time. And
yeah, it's a really fun piece to listen to, and you can go to missionmoonglow.com and listen to the entirety. But it's also really fun and cool to have your own record pressed.
Yes, that's fun. So that leads us to our adventure with field theory. So we had been, ever since we moved up here, we've been thinking about starting a business that kind of incorporated all the things that we love and some of the things that we were missing, that we felt like we left behind a little bit in San Antonio, and we wanted to recreate in a way. And so Tom and I started building a website when the pandemic happened, and we had a lot of time at home, and we just said, you know what, let's just put anything that we're interested in doing in it, and we'll subtract and add as we see fit. We came up with the name Field Theory, and Field Theory Alaska, to be specific, for anybody who wants to follow us on Instagram or on Facebook. Can you say anything about it?
Yeah, so basically it's a single housing that sort of encompasses all of the things that we were already moving towards doing or already doing. And it was just a way for us to bring it all under one shell. So let's go to the next. Yeah, so field theory hopes to sort of foster ideas of exploration and appreciation of nature and education through art and ecology in Southwest Alaska. We put together a shop that we can sell our artwork, as well as
just put some fun merchandise and things like posters and t-shirts.
Just some fun stuff.
Gives us the flexibility to just make and sell potentially.
And we can put all sorts of other things on there as we find it cool. Another thing that we're offering is printing services. So getting up here, it was difficult for me to find reliable printing services, and I know that they're here, but I just was having a hard time connecting. So I went ahead and purchased a printer and all sorts of fine art papers that I normally use. And so we're just going to put it out there that we offer printing services as well. So if you do need printing, please let me know.
If anybody needs printing, let us know. We're happy to help. You can find it on fieldtheoryalaska.com.
Yeah. And then one of the other fun things that we're doing is we're offering workshops, photography, photo editing, still life drawing, painting, basically for students of all ages at different skill levels. We're putting together workshops that will be throughout the year.
Yeah, and they're marketed to anybody. So I teach elementary art, and Tom teaches middle school right now. And we noticed with the pandemic that homeschool kids, had these budgets for art. And so we were like, well, why don't we offer art workshops? But then Tom and I also miss teaching adults art.
We did.
And so we were like, well, let's have it be, adult classes too. And the lady who's in this photograph here is one of my beginning painting students at Texas Tech. And I took them to the botanical gardens on campus, which was so much fun. And so there's some ideas in the works for the future of maybe doing botany painting classes, or, painting from taxidermy specimens, or drawing. Tom's thought about, of course, like photo workshops and such. But yeah, so please let us know if there's anything you're interested in taking in the comment section. We would love to have some community feedback about what might interest you. And then another thing, one of the things I miss not working at the zoo is just talking to cool people. Honestly, with the zoo having 1,000 employees, all with really cool backgrounds, and just people coming in and out of that facility all day long, conversations were just always rich. And Alaska, especially in the winter, can sometimes just be isolating. And so I decided that I wanted to start a podcast adventure. I know everyone's starting a podcast. I'm going to do it too. And this one's going to be about Alaska conservation topics and issues. I want it to be about chefs who are really innovating, artists who are doing unique things. I want this to be a thing where, one, if Alaska residents are just looking for something cool to do, you could listen to this podcast and realize there's this neat thing that you haven't gone and seen or done and go out and do it. Or if people are visiting from the lower 48, and as they refer to it, some of my friends, that once in a lifetime trip, I would love for them to listen to this first before they come up and just realize, what's going on with the beluga migration and when's the best time of the year to see them. And, why are there not as many fresh fruits in the winter, or why are they just slightly maybe more expensive? But yeah, so that's the dreams for the podcast, and I'm curating my list for season 1 right now, and I'm hoping to have podcast episodes up this summer for people to listen to the first season. And then really enjoying our work with the Mission Moonglow project and working together. Tom and I have decided to continue doing projects, and we're really interested in public art. I just think, one, having worked at the zoo and seeing the impact that those pieces can have when you have so many guests walk through in a day. Like, the numbers are astonishing, and people who read the signs and look at it in those public venue spaces, but also just the funding that comes from those are wonderful. And so we are making ourselves Field Theory Collective, which is basically just he and I. Collective just sounds fun. And we're going to be formulating some public art projects, and we have some ideas, but only one kind of little sketch that we've made so far, and it's really referencing nature and urban spaces. And I like to think of them as field theory kiosks, and I'm not really sure Tom is keen on the word kiosk yet.
I feel like I need to put my credit card in it.
It's like an information kiosk, but I don't know. I'm just imagining something like this, like a very trailhead, nature-oriented signage that is in the middle of like downtown Chicago, and it's talking about the types of grass and plants and insects and small mammals and birds and things that they're living with every day and potentially don't realize it, and also the impact that it has on their environment. Yeah, and so I would like for them these little hubs that are connected with an online network and have these little field theory kiosks all throughout the United States that are interconnected by kind of a website social network in some way. But yeah, that's kind of an inkling of an idea, along with Mission Moonglow continuing to grow and expand and travel out, and then potentially some other projects as well. But I think that's kind of our last slide. So I wanted to show you, we would love to have followers on Instagram. So if anybody's on Instagram, please go follow us at fieldtheoryalaska.com. This is my little guilty habit as I get on there, and I like to see who's messaged or commented in the box. I love chatting with people. So yeah, and then I also put if you have questions or anything, we'd love to hear from you on our email at fieldtheoryalaska@gmail.com. And then there's our website that Jason shared earlier, www.fieldtheoryalaska.com. But yeah, that's the end of our presentation. So if anybody has any questions, please let us know.
Yeah.
Words.
I always have questions, but
I love it, Jason.
I'm gonna wait and let other people say something.
And it could be questions about anything. It doesn't have to be. It can be about how we work together. It doesn't necessarily have to be about field theory or our artwork even. I don't know if anybody else is an artist couple out there.
I guess this is going to be one of those awkward questions, but I guess what I always worry about with collaborative couples is like, how do you contend with ego? Or is that just not a problem at all with you and everything's perfect?
Perfect.
No, it's not.
No, it's a tough thing. You know, it's that weird thing of, you know, one, I'm really happy when Carol succeeds, like super happy.
Sure.
At the same time, you know, there, you know, I want my idea to succeed. You know, I want to fight for my idea. And so, you know, I think that when we're collaborating, and especially when we're working on a project together, we got to set a lot of that aside and maybe take a breath when we're talking about whatever it is. Like, you know, I'm not a big fan of the name kiosk. And so, you know, take a breath, step back, maybe do my own research, come up with a couple of alternatives, and realize that I might not win all of the battles, you know?
I think it took a while. I think I'm getting better at it. I would get really upset at Tom when he would get an exhibition and I wouldn't, and vice versa, especially in San Antonio. So it would be, I have an exhibition, a solo exhibition in April, and he just got done with his and he's on that high, and all of a sudden he's on the low because, oh, I have nothing and she got something. Where am I? And so then you're like, well, you know, that spiral of I'm useless, what, no one cares about me. And then your spouse is now having that ego rise and yours is on the decline. I think that we've come to realize that
it's all artificial.
Well, but like it's both successes. Inevitably, you know, anytime he put up an exhibition, I was there doing it with him and vice versa. So his victories are my victories. I also think that we've identified our roles a little bit differently. I realize that I am more the website person, the calendar person, the scheduler, pushing the agenda, and that's not Tom's role. And so I think finally figuring out what the role is. I don't know. I think I've also dispensed with my ego, and Tom had I had to dispense with my ego at the zoo because I went from teaching college to working as a community programs person in a completely different field. And it was like, no one cares about my MFA and that I taught design. And that was hurt me for a while. And I was like, I was teaching painting at Texas Tech. Hello, everybody. And no one cared. And so that was a humbling couple years and grounded me. And I think that, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think that the answer to your question is you never quite get over it, but you always have to push it aside and say that the ego doesn't have a place in the collaboration.
Yeah.
There's some decisions that I think Tom are fine with, and I'm not like the base of the moon. We can't agree on, neither of us like how it looks, and we can't agree on what it should be.
Figure out a better solution that we both agree on.
So we don't have one. We'll figure it out at some point when when we have to have a solution, and he gets tired of fighting the battle.
Well, that definitely answers it, and I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Anybody else? Well, thank you all for being here. We appreciate you listening to us chat about ourselves.
And so before we say goodbye, I wanted to really quick let everyone know once again about those upcoming Photo Tuesday events. Our Photo Tuesday event for April will be Sarah Manriquez, a Fairbanks-based and also New Mexican-based photographer that is focusing on highlighting the homeless population in Fairbanks and giving them a voice. And then in May, we have Deborah Schlitt coming in, which is I believe an Anchorage-based photographer that will be showcasing her work. On top of that, we do have some exciting news that Rarefied Light will be coming back in its full glory with, you know, COVID protections involved. We're changing up a couple of things to make the call for art work a little bit easier, a little bit smoother for some artists. And we're looking forward to sharing some details in the coming weeks about that. But let it be known that the traveling exhibition is coming back. It will be a physical exhibition, and we'll have a juror discussion as well as a juror workshop, and details on all of that pending. So make sure that you're following us at akphotocenter.org or through Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, and look on those platforms for any additional information. I want to thank both Tom and Carol for being here tonight, for talking about their amazing collaborative work and giving us all hope that we can all collaborate with other artists and our significant others and all of that with our own projects. And it's so refreshing to see some new faces in Alaska, and we're so glad to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. It's been great talking.